Welcome back. This is Two Beards in a Bible. I'm John Swano, and this is
Dave Tenney.
And we're going to look into the scriptures with you here this day, and we hope that you'll follow along with us. We are looking at John chapter 4, and we're going to start reading at verse 46. Dave is going to read verses 46 and following there of John chapter 4.
Okay, here we go. It says, So Jesus came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And there was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum, and when he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and implored him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Then Jesus said to him, Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will by no means believe. The nobleman said to him, Sir, come down before my child dies. And Jesus said to him, Go your way, your son lives. So the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him, and he went his way. And as he was now going down, his servants met him and said, Your son lives. Then he inquired of him the hour when he got better. And they said to him, Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him. So the father knew that it was the same hour in which Jesus said to him, Your son lives. And he himself believed in his whole household. This again is a second sign that Jesus did when he came out of Judea into Galilee.
All right. So as we look at that, what was Jesus going to do, anyways? As he was,
I guess he was just going there to preach.
Yeah.
So he left. He was what we talked about our last episode. We talked about him being with the Samaritan woman and staying with that city of Samaria, and he left there, and now he comes into where he was heading originally, back to where he came from.
Right.
Where he changed the water into wine,
mm-hmm.
and this nobleman comes up to him, and apparently his son was sick.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting there that. He said to the people, unless you see a sign, you won't believe. But this nobleman, he did take Christ at his word, and he believed and went on his way. And then his faith was all the more built up when he got home and realized that, his son truly was. And it's interesting, the confirming of the time. We have that in there, and we can surmise, I think rightly so, that from that we can build our own faith from that and understand that these things really did happen as there are written in the scriptures.
Maybe today, if one of us was a nobleman, would say, "Well, Jesus, we're not going to believe unless you hit us in the head,"
right?
and how, or hit us with your coat or something.
You think of when Jesus says that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And you think of this nobleman who obviously has some station in life. And, it is difficult when we get too far ahead of ourselves, when our heads get a little bit too big because of who we are,
Right.
And when we start to think much of ourselves, then a lot of times our ability to have faith and to believe.
To humble ourselves.
Exactly.
It becomes, I think if you think about people who have been successful financially, mm-hmm. especially people who start businesses. I mean, right. You've got to have a pretty big ego to do some of those things.
Right.
And I think that speaks to that kind of attitude.
Yeah. And God created man, and he created us with our different personality types. To some degree, our personalities are developed by our surroundings and the way that we grow up, and what we're subjected to. But our makeup is all different. We have different reactions to different things, but it really does. It takes. We can use that to our good if we are one of those people that maybe would be good in business because we do have an understanding of what our abilities are, and we say, well, I could do that, and we have that confidence. It's can work out to our good if we have that under control. and if we are humbled and understand, just exactly who
You would
we
know
are.
that. You ran a business for a long time.
Well, and it's interesting because I just saw something just recently, and I can't remember where I saw it, but it was a listing of people with certain personality traits, and then and along the lines with like serial killers and criminals were preachers, because you have to have a bit of confidence, and that can be used in a good way. It can also be used in a bad way. Any of these things these gifts that we get from our Creator, our breath of life, we can use that to our good or our detriment.
Hey, one thing that I always like to point out when we're talking about this story is, the ability for the nobleman's son to be healed didn't have anything to do with that son's faith.
Right.
It wasn't the son's faith that made him well.
All right. Yeah.
Some people would say today, they would claim to do a present day healing thing,
Right.
and they'd say, oh, well, the reason you're not healed is because your faith is not strong enough. Well, this nobleman's son had nothing said about his faith.
Right. Yeah. And that's such a sad thing. When people do that, when they say it's because of your faith, and if I've told this story before, I apologize, but in college, one of my psychology classes was sent to study group dynamics in a large church that supposedly did healings. And they had a healing service, and after the service, people came up and were healed. And we're sitting there watching this, and a man came up to be healed, and this person knocked him over, demons out, and he knocked him over, and then he got up and went off stage, and he got back in line. And I'm kind of sitting there watching, like, why did he get back in line? And after a while, he gets back up there and says, my foot still hurts, or whatever it was. And the healer, instead of doing what he says he can do, he said, well, it's because you don't have faith. I can't do anything if you don't believe. And then he knocked him over again, and this time the ushers carried him out the back door, so he couldn't get back in line a third time.
Oh, that's funny.
And that just is stuck in my mind. And I think back to, first of all, that gift of healing is no man has that today. No. We talked about that in previous episodes, but yeah, that's a good point. That it didn't depend on that son and his belief. It also didn't depend on, the nobleman wanted Jesus to come and heal him, but Jesus did that remotely.
Yeah.
He has control of everything.
He was the original work from home guy.
Right. Yeah, he did it first.
He did it first.
And he was healed immediately. We have that evidence in there. And the nobleman, he went immediately and believed.
Oh, yeah.
So that was something that we see again and again. For those that have faith, they immediately do what the Lord tells them to.
They don't wait around. Well, I think that about wraps up John chapter 4, and I think chronologically as we're going through the New Testament, so now we're going to go into the book of Mark, I believe? Mark chapter 1. And John is going to read 16 to 39 in Mark chapter 1. And that chronologically puts us in the next place here in the New Testament.
Okay. So Mark chapter 1, starting at verse 16, and stop me if I go too far, but we'll start reading at verse 16. And he walked by the Sea of Galilee, and he saw Simon and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men. They immediately left their nets and followed him. When he had gone a little farther from there, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, who also were in the boat, mending their nets. And immediately he called them. And they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and went after him. Then they went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and taught. And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, not as the scribes. Now there was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, "Let us alone. What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Did you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." And when the unclean spirit had convulsed him and cried out with a loud voice, he came out of him. Then they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? What new doctrine is this? For with authority he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And immediately his fame spread throughout all the region around Galilee. Now as soon as they had come out of the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. But Simon's wife's mother lay sick with a fever, and they told him about her at once. So he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her, and she served them. At evening, when the sun had set, they brought to him all who were sick, and those who were demon-possessed, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. Then he healed many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons, and he did not allow the demons to speak, because they knew him. Now in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." But he said to them, "Let us go into the next towns, that I may preach there also, because for this purpose I have come forth." And he was preaching in their synagogues throughout all Galilee, and casting out demons.
Okay.
All righty.
Let's talk about some of those things, though. The first thing we talk about are these four fishermen that Jesus calls to be his disciples. Because really up to this point, he hasn't really got he hasn't really called his disciples to him.
Mm-hmm.
So he sees these two sets of brothers, Simon and Andrew, and James and John.
Mm-hmm.
And they become Jesus' first disciples here.
Right.
And they were all fishermen, which, I saw this, I can't even remember where I saw this, but it was a thing that was talking about what fishing was like back then. And, that was a man's job.
Mm-hmm.
And they would usually fish with like two boats. And, when they would put the net out, like one of the guys would jump in the water to help spread that net out. So there's a guy swimming there. I mean, it was a tough job and a dangerous job.
Yeah, yeah. And even today, I mean, there are TV shows that chronicle, fishermen out in the ocean, and they're a rough bunch.
Oh, they are, and
definitely hardworking.
I worked with this fella, and he spent a lot of time in Alaska, running a fishing boat, and he said that he only did the salmon season in Alaska. He says, but a lot of the guys that he worked with, they would go to like Seattle or something, and they would do this crab fishing. And he said they had a thing there they called crab mentality. He says these guys were just like nuts, but they would make all this money.
Right.
During that season. But, sometimes we think about, the fisherman as he's like, there's grandpa out there with the fishing pole. And
the hardworking people. And there may be something said to that. There's a few of the people that Christ chose that were fishermen. And, they make that analogy of making you fishers of men. But when we think about what we were just talking about, it's hard work.
It is.
It's hard work to go out there and to share the gospel of Christ.
It's also interesting or worth noting that Jesus, he didn't go out to choose the like smartest guys. Mm-hmm. Jesus didn't go and say, I need the leaders of the Jewish community. These are the people that are going to really understand what I'm talking about. No.
Yeah, and just like today, when Paul went into Athens, and I think I've got my geography right there, and he went into the center of town, what were the learned people talking about. They were talking about all these different gods,
Yes.
and they even had to the unknown God.
Just in case they forgot one.
Correct. And so sometimes we can think too much.
We can. We can spend too much time mulling over things that don't really matter.
Right. And the other thing that struck me in this is, again, when Christ called them, did they say, well, let us finish our catch, let us finish the season?
No, they got up and went immediately.
Right. And it's a recurring theme that keeps popping up.
Yeah. Matthew, he was the tax collector, but he did the same thing.
Right.
He immediately left.
Left his post.
Yes.
In the middle of the shift or whatever. Yeah.
So the next section we talk about is about this unclean spirit. And there's a man in a synagogue you read about, and he's got this unclean spirit, and he's saying through this unclean spirit recognizes Jesus. Mm-hmm. He says, "Let us alone. What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Did you come to destroy us? I know you are the Holy One of God." So here's a demon who has faith.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And the other thing of note there is that, and we see this whenever Christ has come into contact with one of these demons or unclean spirits, he tells them to be quiet.
He does.
And I read something, and I don't remember where I read it. It might have been in the Fourfold Gospel book there, that where it talked about, when we think of maybe things of the occult today, and I never really thought about this in this light, but thinking about the idea that Christ didn't allow those demon spirits to speak or to say anything. He never told anybody to go seek the counsel of them.
Right.
So we should be very careful on who we call on.
Right. Rather, he told them to be quiet.
So close your horoscope books and and read the scriptures.
Exactly. Oh.
And like you said, even that unclean spirit knew that he was the Holy One of God, and that's something to get our attention.
Of course, and his fame spread throughout because of this.
Yeah.
Then we find out about Peter's mother-in-law. Now, this is an interesting thing when we think about Catholic doctrine. And I always found this curious that Catholic priests are not allowed to marry. And Catholic popes are not allowed to marry. And they claim that the popes are descended from Peter, but Peter had a mother-in-law, which must have meant he had a wife.
Isn't that interesting?
I find that odd.
I never thought about that. Yeah. Right.
Maybe it's because my wife was raised Catholic and we've had a lot of conversation about these sorts of things. But
yeah, connect the dots there.
But yeah, so Peter was married. Mm-hmm. He was married. He had a mother-in-law, and it says Simon's wife's mother. I'm going to get this out one way or another. Lay sick with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her, and she served him. So,
yeah,
that's just one little footnote there.
Yeah.
So now we read about some people that are healed. So Jesus, it seems like this is like this part of his ministry. I mean, he's really doing a lot of this. He's going to places. He's talking, I would imagine, about the kingdoms at hand. That seems to be like the theme of what his teaching is.
Yeah. Yeah. Back in verse 15, the time was fulfilled and the kingdom of God is at hand.
Yes.
Repent.
Yeah. Similar message that John the Baptist was preaching.
Right.
So he's telling everybody, he's looking towards the future. And, and he goes and he heals all these people. And then he goes to pray. Mm-hmm. And does he go out and make a big showy deal of it?
Yeah, no, he went into the mountain, I believe is what it said. And he went for an entire day, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lesson for us, when we pray.
Right.
It's probably a good practice to get into is find a place, some sort of solitary place.
Right.
Typically for me, it's before my wife goes to bed. So I'll go upstairs first, and that's a time when I'll pray because nobody's up there.
It's hard to find a quiet place in a house with kids.
It is.
Sometimes. Right.
I have to hide in the closet.
Right. and that's there's definitely some truth in that, and it seems, again, when people look out into the religious world, we're not even just talking about the church, but it exists in the church too. But when people look out into the religious world, they see a bunch of people with robes and fancy clothing and a bunch of fancy words, and they're making a show.
Or they're reading the prayer out of a book.
Right.
And I don't know how many times I've seen that, and it just makes me sick.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? Everybody sees how fake you are when you're doing that.
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous. Prayer is us talking to God.
Right.
Us talking to God.
And there again, we have the the model prayer that we find in the scriptures, and we as human beings, again, I mentioned earlier that we like check boxes. Just tell me what I need to do, and I'll do this, this, and this. And so when we see something like that, which is more of a template, a guide, we tend to want to just say, okay, well, if this is what God wants of us, we're just going to do this, this, and this, but we're missing the whole point. God wants us to be those that have a relationship with Him, that talk to Him, to ask, to put our cares on Him, and to ask those things that are according to His will, that we need in our lives. And it's a much deeper process than what we see in the religious world. And people see that, and just like you said, they can see how fake it is, and then they automatically equate that with God.
Yeah. God doesn't need us to read a story to Him.
Right.
And
He already knows what's in our minds, just like Christ knew what the people were thinking at these various times that we've talked about.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no reason, when you pray from your heart. I've heard it said many times, and I've said it many times, that, that prayer is us talking to God, and this is God talking to us.
Right.
Communication's a two-way street. That's the two-way street. So
yeah,
not
absolutely.
too tough to understand.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and so as we see Christ's fame, I suppose, increasing here, He's making a stir. People are coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, to come be healed by Him, and He's generated quite a bit of curiosity.
Yeah.
Here in Galilee.
and as we read on, he's got some curiosity of the kind maybe he didn't want.
Right.
Or maybe he did want it.
Right.
But I mean, it stirs up some opposition too.
Right. Yeah. And so at some point he tells his disciples that let's leave here. Let's leave from here. And why did he?
Oh, he wants to see as many people as he can.
Yeah, he had a gospel to preach.
Right.
He had a message. He was sent to do to spread this gospel.
Yeah, his mission wasn't to come and heal people.
Right.
The reason he healed people was to verify that he was who he said he was. Mm-hmm. That was the reason for Bible miracles had a reason. It was to confirm the words of the people that were doing these things.
Right.
And today we don't have those things. But we have God's revealed word, which they didn't have.
Right. So, and we are in a often think about it and say and mention that we're in a place where we can look back and hindsight is 20/20. We can look at these accounts of what happened, and we can look back and say, well, that was silly. Why did they do that? And we tend to think highly of ourselves and think, well, I wouldn't do that.
I would have never denied Christ.
Right.
I've heard people say that in a Bible study.
But not so quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we do need to be careful and not lose sight of just how fortunate we are to have the scriptures and use them.
Yes. That'll about wrap us up.
I
for
think
this
so.
one,
Yeah, I think that's it. Well, that having said that, let's. I would like to invite you, of course, to study more with us. Our purpose here is that to open up the Scriptures, and we're learning as we go along the way too. I mean, it's certainly been said many times that no one learns more than the teacher, and so as we present these lessons we're going through and learning as well, we'd love to learn with you. We'd love to share the gospel of Christ with you, as Christ mentioned here. He had a gospel to preach, and he wanted to get that out to as many people as possible.
Yeah.
And we have this medium of the internet, and we're hoping to further that and reach as many people as possible. We would love to study with you. Contact us, and we would love to be helpful any way we can in that regard. So without further ado, we'll turn you loose, and we thank you for joining in with us here today, and we'll see you next time, Lord willing.